Well, thank you very much for that welcome, and it's a privilege to be here talking to you today. It is also, I might say, one of the greatest challenges I've had to meet in recent years, because generally speaking, I have a presentation to talk about this play of around about 45 minutes, and I don't really think you're all going to be sitting here in 45 minutes' time. So to actually cut this down to a reasonable length is not easy, but I'm going to try. Um, I'm interested that Gildy had some problems with the name of this event, the Ober Ammer Gal Passion Play. And I haven't done a very good job in teaching her how to say it, in spite of the fact that I've explained very carefully that it's very Germanic. It's really three words: Ober, which means upper; Ammer, which is the name of the river that runs through this little town in Germany; and Gal, which means region. So Oberammergau is actually the upper regions of the Ammer Valley. And Oberammergau itself is just a very little place, but it's renowned for this, as you see on the screen, this passion play, which has gone on. Just look at those dates, will you? From 1634 coming up to 400 years in 2034. Now, that is really something quite remarkable. And it's made this play a world event, of course. I'm going to try and cover this very quickly over four separate aspects. The place itself, which is such a charming place. How many of you have been there, by the way? Could you? Yeah, I thought there would be a fair number of people. And how many people have attended the Passion Play? Only one lone person who saw the play and lived to tell the tale. Well, there you are. The place itself, the background story, which is a fabulous story, my own involvement in it, and the Passion Play today. And then, of course, I would like to talk a little bit about the novel I have written based on a fictional version of the Passion Play. Well, let's have a look at where we are, first of all. I said it's a little town in southern Germany. You come down through Germany from the north to the south, and you can see coming down south, you get down to Munich or München. You get on a train in Munich or in your car, and you travel for about 2 hours to this tiny little town called Oberammergau. And I mean little. You look at it. It's a very little, it's scarcely much more than a large village. Total population is 5,000, and it is, and this is significant, ringed by mountains, the Bavarian Alps all round, so that in wintertime it becomes a very famous ski centre, ski resort. Oberammergau is famous for a number of things, as well as the Passion Play. It's famous for the houses. And those of you who've been there will recall wandering through little cobbled streets, down alleyways, and around every corner there is a painted house. And by painted house, I mean painted with pictures all over the walls, like this. Pictures that are spectacular. And you go from house to house to house. You see these pictures, these painted walls, and people walk around Oberammergau with a camera in their hands, snapping the whole way. And these days, of course, it's a phone, not a camera. That particular one, and I'm sure you can recognize on it the scene at the front, which is poor little Red Riding Hood in there, meeting the wolf in the forest, and on the side wall, the second or the later stage of the story with the hunter saving her from a fate worse than death. I first saw Oberammergau many, many decades ago on a camping tour of Europe with my then husband and 2 children. And as we drove through this place, I thought, this is fascinating. I would like to know more about it. And I discovered that this place is famous for this Passion Play, which has gone on all these centuries every 10th year. The Oberammergau play is not the only Passion Play. And a Passion Play refers to a play which covers a week in the life of Jesus Christ, from Palm Sunday, entry to Jerusalem, up to a week later, Resurrection Sunday. The events of that week are what make up the material of a Passion Play. And there were many around in the 1600s, but this is the one that has best known and has survived best. Its origins themselves were quite fascinating. It came about, this particular Passion Play, back in the 1600s, in a period when war was raging throughout Europe. Armies were marching, particularly from north to south. The Swedish armies were coming south. On the way, they not only fought battles, but they raped and pillaged and stole things and generally slaughtered the inhabitants and carried with them, which was perhaps even more dire, the Black Plague. As soon as I say the word plague, we can immediately do a quick switch back a year or two to when a pandemic hit us. And we know the sorts of things that we resorted to. Now, in Oberammergau, when the plague hit, they tried desperately to do whatever they could to stop it. And they did what we did, remember? We closed the borders. And we thought, we can do this. We can keep the plague away. The plague then, which was hideous, not just its physical effects, but the death rate was enormous. Whole villages were wiped out. People were buried, thrown into pits. It was a shocking time. And Oberammergau thought they could keep safe by simply closing off all the mountain. Now, remember the slide I showed you with the mountains all round? Close off all the mountain passes, keep people out. Fine, it worked for a little time. But people are people, and human nature is human nature. And a man who had been working in a neighbouring town thought, I'd love to see my wife and children again. Understandable reaction. And at that point decided he was perfectly healthy. He would sneak his way back in, and did. And of course, with him came the plague. Within a few months, large numbers of people were not just sick, but dying. I've seen the death toll in the parish register. The list of the dead is scary. People gathered. It was a very devout age. Gathered in the village church, made a promise to God that if he would spare them further deaths, they would offer every 10th year to him a passion play as a thank you tribute. And that was the start of the Oberammergau Passion Play. The first one was the next year in 1634. Legend says the deaths stopped. I'm not sure whether they actually did stop or whether that's just a story, but certainly the play lasted. Over the 4 centuries that it's been going, it has changed quite a lot. From one performance out in the village churchyard, got bigger and bigger, to surrounding villages came, surrounding towns. By the 19th and the early 20th century, the Passion Play in Oberammergau was a major world event for people to go to. Kings, emperors, statesmen, famous musicians, artists. You went to Oberammergau every 10th year. It was a thing to do. The play itself has changed somewhat as the years have gone on. The script for it and the text is still the original scripture text. It has not diverged from that, but the play has changed in its emphasis. It is just as popular today as it has been for 400 years. And every year, a vast number of people go to this theatre. It started in the village churchyard. It moved out into an open-air theatre outside. It got bigger and bigger as the years went on. About 1890, the basis of this theatre was built, and this is today the theatre that you go to in Oberammergau to see the Passion Play. People are seated. They weren't originally, they are now. And 10 years ago, they introduced something else new, a retractable roof over the stage for bad weather. That must have been a blessing to the actors. This play is remarkable, not just because it's lasted so long, but because it is a town-owned and run play. And the whole population, the whole 5,000 of Oberammergau, are involved in it. Over half people are actively part of the play in one capacity or other. It's a total event for the town. But to be in and involved in the Passion Play, you have to meet quite strict criteria. You have to have been either born in Oberammergau or have lived there for 20 years. Apart from that, you're not eligible to be in it. And one lovely man I met was so excited because this year, for the first time, his wife was going to be in the Passion Play. and his family for centuries had been part of it. But he said to me, "Ah, you know, Frau Volk, you know, this year is special for our family. This year, my wife also, can she be part of it? Because we married 20 years ago and she came to live here. So now she too could be in the Passion Play." It's put on every 10th year, May to October. For 5 months of the year, it's put on 5 times a week. It's a long event. You go there for the day. It used to be all morning, go away, have midday meal, come back. These days, it's afternoon and evening. But more than 500,000 visitors from all countries of the world come. From France, from Sweden, from Japan, from the Philippines, from America, and of course, a lot of Australians go. Very popular if you don't drive there yourself. Most people would go on a bus tour, part of a bigger tour, or else just a short tour to Oberammergau and back again from Munich. 18 months before the play is put on, serious preparations begin. The whole village gathers in that big amphitheatre and they renew the vow that was made in 1633. And a little girl comes to the front of the stage and speaks these words, in German, of course, but this is an approximate translation. "Mindful of the vow and faithful to the solemn promise of our ancestors, Oberammergau will reenact the Passion Play in the year of our Lord." Well, when I was there, it was 2018, and she said 2020, which of course didn't happen. Pandemic, COVID, closed it down. And the Passion Play of 2020 was put on for 2 years later. So May last year, 14th of May, was the opening day of the 2020 Passion Play, a bit delayed. Well, what happens in the play? Basically, as I said, it's the events of Easter week. That is what's happening on the front of the stage. And while the play is spoken, acted, and sung in German, everybody there gets a copy of this book. It's a short libretto, really, a text of the play, and it's in whatever language you speak. So that as the play is performed, you can follow from this book what is actually being said. Very efficient. That's at the front of the stage. The back of the stage is a sort of a closed-off inner stage, and in that they put on what are called the tableaux vivants, the living images, in which a frozen scene from the Old Testament is presented. But it's a scene from the Old Testament that matches what is happening during Easter week. And those frozen image people stand, that old game of statues where you stood frozen in position for a long time. It's a bit like that. And while they're standing there frozen, the choir, and it's a full-scale professional choir of Oberammergauers, sings what is going on at the back of the stage so that the audience knows. The orchestra, the choir are both professional standard. People come back from all over the world, if they were born there, to play in the orchestra, to sing in the choir. This year's play, last year's play, 2022, is a work in development. What used to be primarily a religious, theologically, man's individual salvation emphasis has moved to fit the 21st century. And the emphasis now is on the social and the moral and the ethical issues that are raised in the words that Christ spoke. Remember, I said it does not diverge from Scripture, but it picks out and it emphasizes things that are most appropriate for this century. And I've listed some of them there. Issues like poverty and inequality, racism, treatment of women, migrant issues. All of these things come through from the words of Christ that are spoken as part of the new Passion Play. Just a few quick scenes from it to give you a bit of a visual impression. It is enormous. There are up to 1,200 people in the crowd scenes on stage. Boy, how that must take some management. And they are from babies in arms to elderly people who have, some of them now in their 9th Passion Play, because they've taken part in it every decade. So you have from the youngest to the oldest in the community, all part of it. I suppose the most spectacular, the most chilling scene in the whole thing is the crucifixion scene, which is done with the most horrendous exactness to detail, and the sound of the nails being hammered in. Okay, they're hammered not into flesh, but into a hoop at the side of the cross. But the sound of those nails thudding in has the entire 5,000 audience sitting absolutely chilled, as they are during the crucifixion scenes. Extraordinarily vivid. I mentioned there's that little inner backstage. Again, that gives you a visual impression that the small Old Testament scenes that are put on are themselves colourful, spectacular. The dressing, the costuming, the scenery, all of this is done with a great deal of finesse and a lot of detail. I got fascinated by this place and this play. As Gildy said, I've been to 4 Passion plays now in my life. If I live long enough, I'd like to get to another one in 2030. I'm hoping I might still be around. But out of this, I've written a lot over the years in various places, poetry, books, magazine articles, travelogues, and particularly a major novel. Because back in 1980s, I was senior English teacher here in Adelaide at Emmanuel College, teaching Year 12 students, for my sins, Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. Now, it's not exactly easy to engage 16-year-olds with a story of a pilgrimage in the 1300s. And I thought the closest thing I can get to this in modern times is a group of people going to Oberammergau. So I invited in somebody who'd just taken a tour group there, and it was then that I had the light bulb moment. One day I want to write a book about modern people with their own personal private stories going to Oberammergau. And this is the book that resulted, Passion Play. It's subtitled, do it again, Gildy, The Oberammergau Tales. And it developed with a prologue at the beginning, a prologue that's set back in 1633 with Caspar Schissler, the man who brought the plague, begging for forgiveness from the parish priest. But from those opening pages on, it switches straight over to 2010 and a group of people in Sydney and in Melbourne going to the Passion Play. And they set off, and along the way, they do what Chaucer's pilgrims actually did. They tell stories. And as they tell stories along the way, they don't do what Chaucer's pilgrims did for entertainment, telling old stories that people knew. Instead, what they do is tell their own personal life stories. Sometimes they're talking to somebody else. Sometimes they're just lying awake in the middle of the night, the way we all do, thinking about your life. But one after the other, these 20 people reveal to you their life stories and why they are coming to Oberammergau. Deciding on this format was one of the problems. Linking them back so that there's a unity was another. And the book is a journey. They set off from Munich on a bus tour, and bit by bit, as the book proceeds, they move through this journey to Oberammergau and back again at the end. And the stories that they tell are stories that emerge in each of their lives along the way. It became one of the problems, their motivation. And that took me a lot of time and a lot of work. Why have these people come here? And to invent a plausible, realistic sort of a reason for them to be coming to Oberammergau was one of the challenges I had to face. Another was the fact that a book starts on the note of guilt, Caspar Schissler begging forgiveness. As these stories emerge, these 20 stories, and the book is 20 stories, you do find, as they come, that bit by bit, every one of them has something in his or her life that they're feeling guilty about. It might be something very trivial, very minor, the sort of thing that bugs you at 3 o'clock in the morning that you've almost forgotten, or it might be something major in their lives. But the book is also, therefore, in some ways, a development on the theme of guilt. And I think that's what gives it a lot of relevance to all of us. I would defy any of you to stand up and say, There is nothing in my life that I feel guilty about. It would be a brave person who would say that. So I think we can all identify with these 20 people, and boy, are they diverse. You get people as varied as a Vietnam veteran, and you can imagine the guilt that he feels. You get people like an ex-school headmistress. You get people like a parish priest. You even get a very ochre Aussie footballer, and I've done terrible things with that footballer, whom I've paralleled to Chaucer's Miller, because that is the other thing I tried to do, to take Chaucer's 20 people, and this too was hard, find a modern equivalent of Chaucer's people. Chaucer has a foul-mouthed Miller in his book, who tells one of the most scurrilous stories in the Canterbury Tales. I'm sorry to any footballers here, but I found that one of the more scandalous footballers in Australia might make a model. And so my equivalent becomes the footballer who is only going to Oberammergau because in a Munich beer hall, when he was pretty well out of it, somebody sold him a ticket telling him, here, take this. It's a musical. You'll enjoy it. He is not one of the ones who comes back deeply moved by the Passion Play. So the book has a mix of these people, and they are all equivalents to today. Each tells his or her own story. They're linked by that theme of guilt, each of them in some way. And then finding a way to end the book became my final problem. How do you do that? And I brought them back to Munich. And along the way, they have to fill in a questionnaire. So they're little bits and pieces about what they got from this trip to Oberammergau, if anything. And for some of them, it's been a deeply moving experience, even a life-shaping, altering one. For others, it's been a sort of, it was very well put on and I really enjoyed it, but, that's it. And of course, for the footballer, what a waste of time that was. So that is my book, Passion Play. I had a lot of fun writing it. I'm hoping that you will at least, as you leave, have a look at the book, and I'm more than happy to sell copies to anybody who would like it. Thank you.